I'm not a war fighter, haven't been a combat medic, have done just a smattering of this kind of thing. But this is going to be one of our most challenging, frustrating, vexing problems if we do get into that scenario of the grid being down. So right now I'm a surgical oncologist. I exclusively treat people with cancer, specifically breast cancer and melanoma. And for those worried about me too, there's always a chaperone in that room. Anyway, and so you might ask, you know, there we go again. So what's a breast surgeon doing in this room? I mean, talking about grid down medicine. I won't be able to do what I do, grid down medicine. That's my nurse practitioner. We have a great busy practice. I treat about 500 breast cancers a year. Before that, I did a lot of complex abdominal cancer surgery, pancreas, liver, that kind of stuff. But I would, Sandra and I were talking, that I would counter that we are witnessing a slow collapse of our medical system before us. And we have been for the last several years. One of the reasons I kind of got away from that, taking care of that complex stuff, was because I didn't feel like the hospitals, certainly not the payers, are committed to taking care of those patients anymore. Certain research institutions are, but they're really not, the hospitals are losing their ability to take care of these patients. That's my personal opinion, and that's where it stands. So for a while, I mean, I work at this little hospital, you know, get out of everybody's way, this little woman's hospital. We deliver babies, we do hysterectomies, you know, I do breast cancer operations. It's small, 42 beds, but why am I here? I know y'all all thought this was my hospital, being from Mississippi. I know what you're thinking. It's okay. But while I was in Houston, 10 nights a month, I served as an attending trauma surgeon. Every level 1 trauma center has to have a board certified or board eligible general surgeon on call in-house at night. And while I was doing my fellowship, it's 2 blocks away. I mean, all the fellows did moonlighting. We all had kids, loans, or both. And so everybody worked. I was the only one that did this. Most people worked in emergency rooms. Did a little bit of that too. But about 10 nights a month, I was an attending surgeon. Ben Taub is one of the nation's original level 1 trauma centers. A guy named Kenneth Maddox there is kind of a dean of trauma surgery in the country. And this is the new Ben Taub. The old Ben Taub was a pretty interesting place. One of those places where all the hallways were that green tile on the floor, walls and ceiling. It was kind of like a giant green colon when you walk down the hall. You know, just very sterile, but crazy stuff there. All the people from the wards go here. The really nice private level 1 trauma center about 200 yards up the street that has the helicopter, brings in all the people with insurance. We get all the other folks, or we got all the other folks. And so if you name an injury, I saw it at this hospital. And so they actually, this was after Desert Shield and Desert Storm, but the military routinely sent residents to rotate with us, just like they sent them to Baltimore and other places. So crazy stuff. But actually, this kind of stuff is not necessarily what's going to be your most vexing medical problem after grid down, I don't think, for a lot of reasons. My other cred is I was briefly medical director of this outfit called the Mississippi Preparedness Project. That is the SPLC hate watch list. Notice that the Tea Party and Oath Keepers are on there as well. I told you. And so, like most organizations like this, it fell apart due to interpersonal disturbances, and I just got tired of it and left. But after I left them, I had something happen in my life that actually kind of refocused me and refocused what I was looking at in respect to setting up or taking care of medical problems in a grid down situation. I met this great lady who clearly was either under the influence of mind-altering substances or space aliens, and eventually married me. But one of her deals when we first started seeing each other was she told me, "Look, I got this medical problem, and where's Lucy?" I told her the real story. I'm not going to tell you all the whole story. Anyway, I've got this problem, and I need it. If it's a deal killer, we'll just walk away. It's no problem. So what is it? You know, so she says, I'm gonna need a kidney transplant one day. I'm like, okay, that's not a big deal. We know how to do that. So about 2 years after we got married, in 2012, she started dialysis, doing peritoneal dialysis. And so, you know, every month this truck would show up with all these case packs of supplies. You know, I mean, like, and they would hand truck it up into the house, and it was quite a stack. She used about 2 cases a week of these peritoneal dialysis supplies, big 2.5 liter sacks of sterile fluid, basically sugar water. And you know, I started to kind of look at that and I go, what would I do? How do I keep her going? And finally, after about 2 years, I accumulated enough I felt like I could keep her going. Maybe not optimally, but keep her going for about 8 to 10 weeks. It was hard to accumulate it because every dialysis patient goes on Medicare. You're forced to. So it's hard to accumulate. It's not like you can go to the Kroger and buy this stuff. But I asked the guy one day, I said, where does this come from? You know, that's kind of what would I do? Would I find a place and go get it? You know, go out hunting supplies? Where does this come from? And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, where's the warehouse? And he said, no warehouse. This stuff gets flown in. It actually comes in on a UPS plane, as heavy as it is, on a UPS plane, palletized, rolls out. And it's a just-in-time delivery system, just like your grocery store, just like your pharmacy. How many of you have taken a prescription to the pharmacy for 60 tablets of something, and they gave you 29, and they said, we'll have the other 31 in 2 or 3 days, we'll call you and come pick it up. Next time you go to the pharmacy, whether it's your small town pharmacy, which is capital restricted from having a big inventory, or your big corporate chain pharmacies, which practice very strict inventory control, look at the depth of inventory on the shelves. It's not very deep. It's not very deep at all. So I started thinking about these things, and interestingly, she came to Mississippi about a year after this happened. And where are you from in South Mississippi?
Jones County.
Jones County. So where he's from is right next to Hattiesburg. Hattiesburg is, what, about 70 miles inland? Yeah. Hattiesburg was shut down for weeks, and they were 70 miles inland, okay? In Jackson, we had 100-mile-an-hour winds for like 12 hours. And we had areas right around Jackson, not Jackson proper, that didn't have power for 6, 8 weeks. Because there were so many trees down and so much stuff torn up. That's what it looked like. That's Highway 90 is right here, okay? That's what it looked like. And it looked, and some of it still looks that way. It hadn't recovered. So we started talking about, what will we do? How am I going to keep her going? Interestingly, speaking of hurricanes, last September, a year ago, I was speaking at a breast cancer conference in Puerto Rico.
Oh.
And I gave some talks in medical school. We were there. We always try to make those little trips, you know, and we stayed a couple extra days. And this is Monday morning, 48 hours before Maria hit. And so we've talked many times about what would have happened if we'd have been stuck there. There was one bag of dialysate in her luggage. We usually shipped it, but she kind of flubbed it. And when you're off the continental U.S., you have to give them lots of notice to ship your supplies to wherever you're going. But she had one bag. You know, I've spoken to people I know there since, and they said it would have taken us 3 to 4 weeks to get out of there. I might have lost her if we'd have been stuck there. So, anyway, I don't know everything about this. Nobody in this room knows exactly how things are going to go, exactly what you're going to need. Nobody in this room can accumulate enough of everything to handle every situation. We got a snake bite guy, a lot of other skills, right? Yeah, but you might not have that guy next to you. You know, you might not have a physician with you, okay? You might not have a nurse. You might not have anybody medical with you, okay, at all. So this is a guy named Jerry Carlson. He was a thoracic surgeon at the Temple, Texas VA where I did my residency. And that was actually a good VA back then, and it actually fell into disrepute. But Jerry was an eternally optimistic Minnesotan, and the residents ran from him because he drove us nuts. But he would have 3 folders for every operation, a blue, red, and a green. And blue was his library folder of papers for that particular operation, reference papers. And the red one was the one he brought to the operating room. And the green one he gave us 1 or 2 nights before the operation to read. You know, and he would come find us. If we had a chest case, we'd call the other chest surgeon. But he would come find us. And he would be coming at you with a folder, and we'd run. You know. And he would actually break scrub during cases and sit down and read a paper for like 30 minutes with the patient. That drove us crazy. But 2 years after I left Temple, I was at MD Anderson, and he called me out of the blue, and he'd been diagnosed with renal cell cancer, kidney cancer, which I've also had, which is kind of weird. But we started a dialogue, and I started to realize that he taught me some things. He taught me a lot of things. One of the things he taught me was that the person giving the talk is the one who learns the most. And that if everybody in the room at a talk takes away one take-home lesson, it's a success that they can use, one take-home lesson. Now, my wife, who is a news anchor and reporter for 31 years, no longer, told me that the average attention span for humans is 15 to 17 minutes. So since I'm encroaching on that now, I think we'll move forward. So we all apply this to every problem, the OODA loop. Everybody in the room, most people in the room know what the OODA loop is. So applying this to this medical care problem, what do you do? So it finally happens. Observe. Lots of stuff to observe. What just happened? You may not know. What was it in Forston's book? Power went out. They didn't know why. They said the power went out, right? Where am I? 2 weeks ago, I was teaching an aquaplastic breast surgery course in Newport Beach, California. And we were on approach to Orange County Airport. And I looked out, and I just was struck, and I was thinking about preparing this talk. And the thought struck me. You know, I got all that stuff at home. Guns, ammunition, medical supplies, food, other supplies. What happens if it happens while we're here? And then my first thought was, I'm screwed. You know, that was my first thought. What happens if it happens here? And I'm not. You know, somebody's going to have a bunch of great stuff at home. You know, who am I with? Who's around me? I don't want to be in Southern California. What do we have? How do we move forward from that point? And that doesn't just apply to medical care, it applies to everything. Everything. Is the power on? Does the water flow? Not every collapse will immediately turn off the power. Not every collapse will immediately turn off the water. If you have the water running, you better fill up everything you have. Every toilet tank, every gallon jug, every bathtub, everything. Keep it full. Survey your landscape, the environmental landscape, not just the geographic landscape, the human landscape. What is around you? Inventory your resources and capabilities. Maybe you've been preparing with medically related stuff as part of your preps. Maybe you haven't. You need to think about it. Establish your base. Is your base going to be fixed, or are you going to be mobile? Establish a physical location if you can. It can be anything. Delegate responsibilities. A lot of people are going to have to wear 2 hats, but I think if you have a community of people, you need a health officer. Maybe that can be a physician. You and I both know if it's a pathologist, you're out of luck, right?
You're screwed.
Yeah, you're screwed. They don't take care of anything live. Just don't. Okay? You need to encourage cross-training. Okay? Everybody needs to know how to do a basic minimum skill set for things like wound care, first aid, how to splint a fracture, you know, how to stop bleeding, how to clean a wound, just how to bandage a wound, basic stuff. And from this course we taught in Newport Beach, going back in February to do another one, and my plastic surgery colleagues, and actually in cancer surgery, and surgery in general, you have to manage expectations. That's probably one of the biggest things that we can do, that we as physicians can do. I mean, you talk to your patients before you put them to sleep, right? They need to know what to expect. And a lot of patients have outsized expectations for what we can do. And the aesthetic surgeons they've got this down. They know how to turn a sow's ear into a silk purse, both physically and mentally. Because they can do a beautiful job, but if their patient ain't happy, that's terrible for them. So they have to manage expectations. And I think that's going to be a big part of what you're going to talk about. You know, I'm just segueing for you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Don't amp me up too much.
No, I won't. No, I'm just going to kind of skim, okay? So, in times of crisis and stress, people need structure. Talked last night about the military structure. They need structure. No structure, no good outcomes. That's just simple human nature and reality. That's why military structures work well. Behind those trees, there used to be a hospital. That's in Port-au-Prince. That hospital wasn't there anymore. Nobody knows what's going to be going on. If the grid down goes right now, 5 miles from here, you won't know exactly what's going on. 3 miles from here, you won't know what's going on. Managing uncertainty is going to be one of the most difficult things we do. Okay? Does anybody know why I use that image? Who watched Breaking Bad? And his nom de guerre was Heisenberg. Okay? Who knows who Heisenberg was? Uncertainty principle, right? So Heisenberg's uncertainty, wrong one. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle was in 1927, applied to quantum physics, right? And it was if you knew the position, if you knew either the position or momentum of a particle with certainty, you couldn't know the other with certainty. So you may know with certainty what you have in your community, what medical care, supplies, capabilities, and this again applies to everything. You may know with certainty what you have, but you don't know what's out there, and you don't know what's going to come to your gate, right? And you don't know what diseases may come to your gate, what problems may come to your gate. So the human landscape, what happens? Who dies after a collapse? Well, I'm going to play with the laser. Once the hospital generators turn off, okay, anybody on acute life support, ventilator, once the person that's bagging them, either manually bagging them, either exhausts themselves or runs off, they're gone. That's it. Acutely ill people, I mean really acutely ill people, heart attacks, strokes, things like that, and those things are going to continue to happen. Things like heart attacks and cardiac events may really occur early on from stress. Acutely injured people are going to be in a bad way. Acutely injured people die now. All these people die now. But the pace is going to pick up. Chronically ill people on life support, like my wife was, at some point, you know, those dialysis patients use tons of consumables, even the hemodialysis patients that go to the clinics. Lots of very specialized consumables. When they run out of those, I mean, my wife could do her dialysis without power. All she needed were her supplies. When there's no more supplies, that's it. Katie barred the door. So, yes?
I think you forgot to mention she got a transplant.
Well, I'm getting there, man.
You're saying was. She was on it.
And now she's chronically ill on maintenance support with anti-rejection drugs. People who take cardiac meds. Think about people who use home oxygen. You know, what if they can't run their oxygen concentrator because they don't have any power? They're gonna slip away. Okay. You know, I will say this: the people who use CPAP machines probably over time will get better if they can get through the initial not having their CPAP, because we will probably cure type 2 diabetes in this country. Right, yeah. So basically the very young, the very old, the very sick are going to be at risk. The next issues you face are intermediate to long-term. Potable water. You may have laid in a huge supply of jugged and bottled water, but at some point that's going to run out. And you cannot handle your healthcare problems without water. A gallon per person per day, the rule of threes, okay? Sanitation. Whoever you designate as your health officer needs to have a hand in managing the water supply and the sanitation, because those two issues are your most two critical ones for your health of your community. Infectious diseases, previously eradicated diseases, over time are going to make a resurgence. In the deep south coastal areas, you'll see malaria. You will see that again. You will see things like typhus and typhoid. They will come back. Smallpox, I don't know how long that will take, but those things will come back with enough, given enough time. Plague, out in the west, you have plague from the ground squirrels all the time, right? Yeah, so you see plague. So, nutrition. How many of you have, as part of your food preps, a multivitamin and vitamin C? Smart. Because you're going to need teeth to eat most of the food we're going to have. And if they fall out because you have scurvy, it's not going to do any good. Plus wound healing and everything is going to be critical. Resistance to infection and everything. Very good. Multivitamin. But yeah, there's a ton of nutritional deficiencies. So those are all very important. And your health officer, all these things are intertwined. Security and triage. Your facility needs to be secure from the elements, but it also needs to be secure from people. Your items that you probably need to have most secure are going to be things like medications, bandages, things that are going to be hard to find. Who's out there? You touched on this a little bit yesterday. It's difficult to exactly estimate the extent of illegal drug use or even abuse of prescription drugs, but we know it's huge. We have to do the CME every year in response to it, right? So who has read How to Swim with Sharks? The pen name of the person that wrote it is called Voltaire Cousteau. and most people in medicine have read it. A lot of people have, at least in surgery they did. And it's but it doesn't just apply to medicine. Rule number 1 is to assume all unidentified fish are sharks. That's it. It'll serve you well. Who's out there? Who comes to the gate? 1 in 6 Americans are on an antidepressant. Some more than 1. A lot of those are SSRIs.
Can you define SSRI?
Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's the most common type of antidepressant on the market today. It's everywhere. You can find Prozac in the water supply. It's disturbing, isn't it?
And so when you go cold turkey on SSRI, what happens?
Oh, anger, black depression. You're not rational. Okay? You're just not rational.
To touch on what happens with a lot of these school shooters and other mass killers are disproportionately on SSRI.
Yes, they are.
And not necessarily always taking them as regularly. So if you want to see how people might possibly react.
You're exactly correct.
So that's 1 in 6 out of 330 million.
Yes.
Rock on.
1 in 6 Americans over 65 are on benzodiazepines. A lot more than that below 65.
What are those?
Valium, Xanax, Restoril, those types of drugs. Xanax is one of the most abused prescription drugs in the country. A lot of people out there, I just saw a new drug advertised this morning for mania, for prevention of manic symptoms in patients with bipolar disorder. It starts with a V. Lots of that out there. A lot of these people are on all three classes of drugs. So when they run out of their stuff, also consider that maybe not a lot of those folks are in rooms like this. Okay? They might not be in a place like this. They might not have that mindset. They might not have a supply of medication because they just always go get it when they need it. And don't forget all the people on Ritalin, Strattera, Vyvanse, Adderall. I mean, it's speed. It's speed. And think of all the people out there on crystal meth. They're not going to be able to get their stuff. That is part of the landscape. I didn't mess up for you, did I?
No.
Okay, good. So these are drug overdose deaths from 99 to 2016. Steady increase, 65,000 in 2016. So, it's hard to estimate how many people take stuff, but I would expect overdose deaths are in the single digits, percentage-wise, low single digits. Overdose deaths, not overdoses, overdose deaths. So do the inverse math on that. It's a lot of folks. So you may choose to have a mobile facility. It's great until you run out of gas, but you may drive it to a place where it's secure from the elements. It may not be so secure from other folks, but your physical locations, not everywhere is going to be like this hospital, potential medical room back here. Even a tent can be a clinic as long as they're dry. Not real secure, but dry. This is across the lawn from facility in Haiti we worked in, and there just was no place to house people. Most of the building was not safe. They were across the lawn, and there were about 100 of those tents, and there were still people out and around. But they were able to salvage a bunch of beds and pull them out there and put them in the tents. So anything. This was a hospital. You can make an OR anywhere, okay, for what I do. Most of what I do is going to be pretty rudimentary, okay, in a grid down situation. We were talking about butter knives. Not the stuff I've done in my career, probably can't do. There might be a few places where they run those kinds of things, but most people aren't going to have these kinds of things. But you can make your medical facility anywhere. This would be a 5-star post-collapse OR. So look at that carefully. Now look at that. What's the difference? Anybody see the difference? Let me go again.
More stuff.
Light.
Yeah. In this one,
Yeah.
most hospital operating rooms don't have windows. Okay, they just don't. And that means you're going to have to use other resources to keep your facility operational. So those are things to think about. It's just a picture of a Syrian hospital ward. People laying about everywhere, bandaged. It's a mess. Hopefully you have more control over your situation than that. The point about that is that these you remember when the hospital got bombed in Syria? Yeah. So they had an ongoing existential threat to their existence at that location. And they had to not only worry about taking care of all these people with limited resources, but they had to deal with that as well. You don't want to have to deal with that. Storage, that's a pretty good storage place. It's dry. It may not be cool. It wasn't cool there. It may not be cool, but because in most of the things you see, store in a cool, dry place, whether it's medication or food or ammunition or whatever, store in a cool, dry place. Well, hopefully you can get dry. You may not get cool in Mississippi for about 6 months out of the year, 8 months out of the year. You don't get cool. But here you can be cool. Up here. Everywhere's different. Everybody's situation is going to be different. No one scenario covers everything. And you certainly can't cover it in an hour. This is not cool, dry storage, nor is it very secure. But that was the only place to put things. So you compromise. I think one of the most important functions of a medical officer kind of goes to what we were talking about the person on post last night, is going to be recognizing fatigue and managing people. And I know I'm trying to make the definitions of what a health officer does expansive, but it really does, it bleeds into everything. Oh wait, where did my thing go? Wait a minute. Oh, okay, I'll get there in a second. Do I have any engineers here? You know what that is?
Yes.
Kludge?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, a kludge is something where you take a bunch of stuff that doesn't really fit together and use it to make something work.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Also known as a credit card system.
There you go. A clumsy or inelegant solution to a problem. But if it works, it works. Improvisation. You know what she's doing here. This is Lisa, our CRNA. When they run an endotracheal tube into somebody, you have to keep the airway stable, so you can't move. And she didn't have any way to stabilize her airway in a patient. And so, you know the racks they have in hospitals that have kind of the wire racks? There were some that were torn up. Just pulled it out and she took it and she taped it all together and then used it to make a hook. That's actually a stylet from an endotracheal tube that used to guide an endotracheal tube. Necessity is the mother of invention. Deal with fatigue. People aren't rational when they're sleep deprived. And she was sleep deprived. The mental battle space. I promise I won't go too far. Managing expectations. People are going to have to adjust to new realities. People are going to die of appendicitis. People in my career die of appendicitis. They were both neglected, one by the patient, one by a doctor who didn't recognize it. But they died. Okay? And everyone was blown away that somebody died of appendicitis. I can take care of, I have enough stuff, including a few bottles of inhalation agents and some oxygen tanks. I have enough stuff that I could probably do 4 or 5 fairly straightforward abdominal operations on my dining room table. I could fix your perforated ulcer, which is actually a pretty easy operation. But you're going to probably die from sepsis or renal failure because I can't support you intravenously long enough or give you enough IV antibiotics. That's the problem. You might be able to do some things, but when somebody comes into the hospital acutely ill, and for example, in my wheelhouse, needs an acute emergency operation, the amount of resources it takes to get that person through that operation and home healthy is incredible. And people really don't understand what it takes. It takes a lot. Accepting what you can and cannot control or fix. New realities. Adapting resources to unconventional use. Stylists, hold on here too. Of course, we probably won't be having very many people on ventilators. Triage. Probably one of the most difficult things, not hard to do conceptually, but it's going to be hard to deal with in your community. Assigning degrees of urgency for wounded or ill patients. Who's gone to the emergency room at 11 o'clock on Saturday night with a sick baby? Anybody? God, doctors love guys like you. Thank you.
Not that I couldn't, because I refused to spend my entire night.
Bingo. Now, if you bring in that baby and they're blue and floppy and look dead, you're going to go right back. Okay?
And who's had the argument with their wife? Give him some time, I'll get the fever down, we'll go.
That's correct.
Right.
But in inner city hospitals, it's a clinic at night. And they get angry. And you might be right, just about ready to go back to the room, and in comes a gunshot wound. Whoop, back in your chair. But I've been here 8 hours. When I was at Ben Taub, we had a Vietnamese wedding that a Vietnamese gang hit it as they came out of the church. We had nine gunshot wounds at Ben Taub. Unfortunately, the Fufu hospital up the street had to take 8. And we could immediately get 4 operating rooms going. And we had to decide which 4 we were going to take up, and there were a couple that almost didn't get there in the next group. I took one, the 5th year chief resident took one, the 4th year took one, which isn't supposed to happen unsupervised, and then we actually drafted a urology resident to take one until I or the chief resident could get in to help him. We gave him what we thought would be the easiest one. It actually wasn't. You never know what you're going to find when you open up a gunshot wound. But they had to be, a decision had to be made. There were only so many resources and so much capability to take those patients. And that was the best around. Level 1 center. Things happen like clockwork, fast. That's the best around.
Fully stocked, fully operational.
Totally.
100%.
Totally. And a couple of those people eventually died from sepsis. Okay. I learned the word triage watching that.
One of the most poorly used words. People think they know it, but they don't really understand it.
Right. I wanted to be Hawkeye Pierce, but I'm so glad I'm not Alan Alda. You know? Interesting side story. I have a friend, Roy Kellum. He's an obstetrician at the women's hospital I work. And we were there late one night watching a rerun of MASH while we were both waiting on something. He was waiting on delivery, and I was taking somebody back probably for a hematoma after an operation. Yes, everyone has complications. The character in the movie, played by Tom Skerritt, was Captain Augustus Bedford Forrest. Where'd they get that name? Who was a young surgeon, and they actually put him into a racial conflict in the movie, remember? Yeah. Even back then, they were telegraphing. But that character, that book was written by a physician, but that character was based on his uncle Grip. They called him Grip. And he worked in Tupelo, Mississippi. But just an interesting piece. So there are some injuries. You know, everybody thinks about grid down medicine, they think about trauma, not about all these other things, dysentery and, you know, all the other normal things that we all get. Snake bite. All those things that we get as part of living daily life. But certain injuries in a grid down situation are going to be likely fatal when you're thinking about triage. They're sometimes fatal in a grid up situation. Penetrating trauma to the torso. Okay? Gunshot wound below the nipples goes get the belly open. Gunshot wound above the diaphragm, you worry about things in the chest. Major closed or open head injury. You know, what happens to an injured brain? It swells. Yeah. Then you herniate. Major open or closed long bone fractures. And it may not get you from the fracture, but 3 things can get you in a grid down situation with a big fracture. One is being stranded. If you're 5 miles away on patrol and you fall down a ravine and break your femur and it's poking through your skin, it's going to be a struggle to get you back here. You can do it, but you may encounter bad folks on the way. It'd take a long time. You're not going to move as fast as you did on foot. Infection. Infection is the overriding theme in grid down medicine for taking care of acute problems. Or immobility. Either immobility in the inability to evacuate an area while recuperating, or immobility in things like pulmonary emboli, which still happen in a grid up situation despite all preventative measures.
During the recovery period.
Yeah, you throw a block because you haven't been moving. Okay. Sucking chest wounds. Combat medics can deal with a sucking chest wound, but they're expecting a helicopter ride. You know, I was going to talk in this about all this, some scenarios like Haiti and like Katrina and Maria and all these things about how to, you know, model it. But you know what the big difference is and what those scenarios are and this is? What we're talking about here? Nobody's coming.
Reach back. Oh, reach back.
Yeah, nobody's coming. In Port-au-Prince, the jets bringing people in, or planes, props, bringing people in, had 45 minutes on the ground to offload and clear the tarmac, and then they had to go. No refueling, they had to go. Covered wall-to-wall planes. But there were planes. No planes coming here. Displaced pelvic ring fracture. You fall down the ravine, don't break your femur, but you break your pelvis. Fall off a bluff or something. Slip and fall. Immobility, internal injuries, bleeding. People still die from these things, even with with support with blood products, fixation externally, and angiography to embolize bleeders. People still die. Not as much as they used to, but they still do. Paralytic spinal injuries, obvious reasons. Greater than 20% total body surface area burns, infection, and volume depletion. You got to know your limits of what you can accomplish. I suspect that in a true grid down situation, the height of our surgical technology in my world will be equivalent to what went on in the Civil War. Draining pus and lopping off limbs. And people will still die. We were talking out there about, you know, gut-shot soldiers in the war of northern aggression. There are stories, reports of soldiers surviving those. But maybe they might get a fistula from their bowel leaking out for a while, and if they didn't get too malnourished and succumb, most fistulas will close from an injury like that. The difference was they were shot with a low velocity weapon. The weapons out there now are different. So that I think will be the pinnacle of our surgical technology. So things like this, anybody know what that is? Tension pneumothorax. With every breath, more air goes in the chest until it finally pushes everything to one side. There's the trachea, which should be over here. Pressure gets high enough, venous flow in gets obstructed because it's low pressure, and the patient dies. My mother died of this on the ventilator with ALS. I was 500 miles away. I don't know that I would have intervened. A closed femur fracture can cost you 5 to 6 units of blood, easy.
Closed.
Closed. You can bleed to hypotension with a femur fracture. The Mac Daddy of all pelvic fractures, the open book. Okay? Many internal injuries, not only from things ripping apart, but from the force it took to create that. Ladies, I did crop the picture to minimize the obvious Throckmorton. If you don't know what a Throckmorton sign is, look it up. I'm not going to explain it. You may laugh. So triage is balancing the likelihood of recovery versus the availability of resources necessary to facilitate it, in a nutshell. And the emotional burdens are going to be significant. People in your community get an injury that there's nothing you can do about. And that is going to have to be dealt with. On-the-fly counseling, right? Limiting access I should have said access to resources by the community. But limiting access to resources will be unpopular. We need to do everything. Well, but you may not know. If you don't have somebody that's trained, and a paramedic, a nurse, physician, you may not know what's wrong. You may expend resources. Train, learn. Operational security. You have a place like this and you have a med room set up. You expel somebody like we talked about last night. Guess what they have over there? They can do an operation over there. Yeah. Not such a great idea for everybody to know that. So post-collapse inventory. not a reliable way to stock yourself, but it may get to that point. Where do you get stuff? Pharmacies, hospitals, nursing homes, warehouses, not as many warehouses as there used to be. Private homes, big box and grocery stores. People are gonna steal the food, they may not steal the bandages at first. But it's a security risk, and everything is risk versus benefit. And somebody else had that bright idea.
Yeah.
So that's an issue. What can you do? What can any individual person do? Overriding theme, know your area of operations, know your space, know the people, know the facilities, know the potential sources of resources. Okay? Train your community. Everybody in your community ought to have some basic life support skills. Now, if you're in a situation where you're doing, CPR on someone in a grid down situation, what's the mortality of inpatient CPR? Isn't it like
93%.
Yeah, it's high. It's really high. But everybody ought to be able to do basic first aid. You ought to learn. Everybody ought to know how to clear an airway. That kind of thing. Basic first aid. Everyone should know how to do that, and it's not that hard. Those courses are out there. So getting supplies, storage space and conditions of storage are important for each of us individually. My wife's about to kick me out. So cool and dry, cool and dry. Shelf life and expiration. What's the average shelf life of an MRE? Isn't it like 10 years?
18 months.
Is it 18 months?
And
Is
it
it
drops by half for every 10 degrees of increase in heat.
Yeah, it's canned goods are a totally different thing. Everybody thinks expiration dates on most canned goods are there so you go buy more. But most pharmaceuticals, there are actually potency issues with those with respect to those expiration dates. And in fact, there are some drugs, tetracycline is a great example, that over time will oxidize into a oxidation product that is toxic to your kidneys. So in some cases, it's dangerous to use an expired drug. Realistic expectations of what you can accumulate. Nobody's going to be able to cover every situation, every eventuality. It's not possible. The cost, I'm looking at trying to accumulate 6 months worth of anti-rejection drugs. It's going to cost me about 10 grand. And then I've got to store it, and I'm going to have to rotate it. It has a limited shelf life. Portability, all this stuff you got. What if you have to leave? Your health officer should, even if you have a nice facility, you have it well stocked, and you planned, and you have everything, the community came together, built this thing, you should still have the capability to rapidly deploy that if you have to leave. It's just some examples. Antisepsis is one of your biggest problems. Infection, you got to keep drilling that. There are a lot of ways to accomplish it. That's rubbing alcohol, cheap. I hate to use Amazon because I hate Bezos, but you got to admire his business model. But you don't have to get it from there. You get it anywhere. Things like that aren't expensive. We used to use alcohol to do skin preps on abdominal operations at Scott and White Clinic in Temple, Texas, until the surgeon got impatient one time and started using the cautery before it dried. That ended that. So, but you got to remember shelf life too for all this stuff. We use these at my home. We are antisepsis freaks now that we have had a transplant. But the active ingredient in this, which is probably one of the most useful products you can have, even though it's heavy, is a 12-month maximum in optimum storage conditions.
6 months in the garage.
6 months in the garage.
For-
Exactly
pretty
correct.
much inert.
That's right.
In liquid form.
Yes, but you get pool tablets. Instead of 50 pounds, I'll probably get 5 10-pounders. A lot of supplies aren't really expensive. 4x4 bandages. The ones on top are sterile, the ones on the bottom are not sterile. About twice the cost to be sterile, but we use a lot of non-sterile bandages. And so you can accumulate these things. Using products in an unconventional way, while that is a food product to be sure, a very good way to clean up a dirty wound is to wash it clean, cover it with a thick layer of 2 to 3 inches of granulated sugar and wrap it up and come back 5 days later, as long as the patient isn't exhibiting signs of infection. That wound will be beautiful in 5 days. Nature has a way to clean wounds. Our little winged friends and their larvae. Yeah. So some quick, easy moves. You talked about vaccinations. Everybody up to date on their tetanus? Okay. Simple things. Get to know your, we keep hammering this, get to know your neighbors and your communities and their capabilities. Within 500 yards of my home in my subdivision, I have at least 3 neurosurgeons. Granted, they aren't going to be able to do squat. That's normally in their purview, but they're physicians. We have a bunch of physicians there. What we need are ex-military guys. Accumulated
the mortgage in that neighborhood.
Huh?
There's the problem with paying the mortgage in said neighborhood.
Said neighborhood,
There's
yeah.
a segmentation happening.
I'll make it do. You can buy it. Accumulated 90 to 180 day supply of maintenance medications. And there are online pharmacies. I use one called healthwarehouse.com. It's out of Kentucky. And there are sympathetic prescribers in your communities that are sympathetic to these problems. And yeah, it's a financial burden, and you have to make sure you rotate the old and use it first. But you can do this. Acquire the basics of water purification, sanitation, antisepsis, and think improvisationally and unconventionally. There's like at least 5 different antibiotics that you can purchase without a prescription that are used for aquariums. It's the same stuff. Cipro, clindamycin, amoxicillin, a lot of stuff you can acquire. There's references. We obviously talked about a failure of civility yesterday. The U.S. Army Special Forces Medical Handbook is a great reference. I've been searching for the laminated ring-bound publication. You have one? You suck. I hate you. So, successful offense brings victory. Successful defense can now only lessen defeat. Curtis LeMay was talking about nuclear war, but it really does speak to being proactive. Okay? That's what everybody here is about. And we have to take that back to our communities and get everybody else on board. I appreciate everybody's time and attention. I did want to say there are some good things about the grid down scenario. You were talking about economic collapse. So I spoke about diabetes, adult diabetes. We'll probably cure that after a few months. And sleep apnea. Yeah, type 2. I won't have to deal with insurance companies anymore. I won't have to carry malpractice insurance. And as I did beginning at 2 a.m. this morning, I will not have to work on charts on a damn computer. Ever again. Or maybe not for a long time. So I hope everybody learned something. I hope everybody can take at least one thing away, like Dr. Carlson taught me. And yes, Mayberry is dead. But I hope everybody learned something.
Thank you.